Hello, today I'm going to be reviewing the Solar EQ. I ended up purchasing this for myself as just kind of a little treat for myself, as I'd been working pretty hard at one of my jobs, and so far, I gotta say, it meets every expectation I could want and more. So far, I'm extremely satisfied with the scooter, and today we're going to go in depth in a review, and I'm going to cover a few areas such as speed, handling, features, quality, suspension, brakes, looks, weight, range, and some other stuff. There's a lot of stuff to go over on the scooter, and I've broken it all down into hundreds of little categories so you guys don't have to, and I'll be able to simplify everything as much as possible to give you guys the best, quickest answer on if you should buy it or not, and what it's actually going to be like and what to expect. So moving along, I'm going to show you the front and rear turn signals on the video here in a second, and the charging ports. Speaking of the charging ports, I really appreciate the fact that they actually have dual charging available, and if you wanted to, you could do dual fast charging. Moving along, here's the front, and then here's the rear turn signals, as I said I would show. Up here, I'm going to let you guys listen to the buttons, as honestly, I'm not one for ASMR, but they sounded pretty good to me. I don't know why, I just thought the clicks were kind of satisfying. As you heard, the horn was pretty loud and everything sounded pretty nice. I don't know why, I just like the way it sounded. Moving along, I'm going to demonstrate the suspension. I am 179 pounds for reference. As you can see, it's a very stiff suspension, but it seems to absorb bigger impacts with no issues. Now, as we get the scooter outside, I'm going to get to go into the categories I was talking about before. I have a piece of paper in front of me with a bunch of information that I gathered on the speed, handling, features, quality, suspension, brakes, looks, weight, range. I'm now going to start by going over the speed. I've broken it down into 3 areas. Number 1 is going to be acceleration, number 2 would be torque, and number 3 is going to be top speed. As far as the acceleration, it's quite a beast. The Apollo Phantom V3 is almost able to keep up, and they're very, very, very similar, but the Solar EQ does pull away by the tiniest bit. That mentioned, it has very good hill climbing capabilities, and the torque is definitely up there with some of the 45-mile-per-hour scooters I've ridden. I'd say it's quite far on the high end, and honestly it has no issue climbing up hills even with me. Now, as far as the top speed, they say it is rated for 40 miles per hour, but I have had no issue getting it up to 43 easily on a flat, and 45 on a slight decline, but I'm pretty sure it'll hit that on a flat too if I actually tried. I've heard reviewers get it up to 46 without issue on a flat, and I don't doubt it. It's pretty good. Moving along to my next section, handling. I'm going to discuss on-road and off-road performance as far as the amount of lean you can go with it and the amount of traction it has when leaning and on gravel or road or other surfaces, the amount of slip the tires give and how it handles on acceleration and deceleration, and overall the average experience. So, hopping right into it, I'm going to say the handling is probably a 10 out of 10. It's one of the best handling scooters I've ever driven on and off-road. On-road, I've had no issue leaning at higher speeds, even when pitching into corners full force and full throttle. I've had no issues when driving it like a maniac. Now, I should mention, I always condone wearing safety gear and being responsible and being a good driver, but I did have to have a little bit of fun and test it around the corners, and I can safely say it is one of the best handling scooters I've ever driven. I don't know if it's just due to the tire compound, or if it's due to something else such as the suspension being stiffer, but it is definitely up there in my favorite scooters for handling. I really, really like how it feels. It might not be for everybody, especially not if you're looking for a more comfortable based drive. But if you're looking for performance and fun and top speed, this is definitely one of the best scooters for that as far as handling. One of my issues I had with the Apollo Phantom V3 is that at speed it felt very unstable. It was a very good scooter as far as comfort, and it's probably still one of my favorite comfort scooters for higher speed, being 45 miles an hour. However, I will say that it does seem to lack the stability at higher speeds. It's not a matter of unbalance, but the bars simply just move too easily, and it feels very boat-like and floaty. I prefer to feel planted to the ground at higher speed, as it just feels safer if I need to lean and corner in an emergency, or hit the brakes. I like the down-to-the-ground, very planted feel that this EQ gives. Moving along to my next part of the on-road handling section, the acceleration and deceleration while cornering, leaning, and just overall, how it handles. It's very good coming out of corners, but I prefer to be gentle on the throttle as with any dual-motor scooter as to avoid dropping myself on my ribs. That would definitely hurt, so I'm always going to lean on the side of being a little bit more cautious. But it's definitely perfectly fine, and I don't think it would have any issues at full throttle if, you're an experienced driver. So far, I'm going to say, even after all this, I'm going to give the on-road handling a 10 out of 10. Backtracking a little bit to the stuff I just said, but for off-road. The traction is still extremely good, and as stated, this was with Tire Road Config 8. And I don't know, again, if it's just the tires or if it is something else, but honestly, it's amazing, and it really seems to have no issue on or off-road. And by off-road, I mean gravel trails, dirt trails, even light mud and wet surfaces like puddles or wet gravel. It doesn't seem to slip super easy. Sure, the front tire will spin, but that's every single dual-motor scooter or front-motor scooter that has enough power. If you're careful on the throttle and you just actually use your brain while driving, this scooter is amazing and honestly just perfect for on or off-road, but even off-road, it's really truly flawless. I'm going to give its off-road performance a 9 out of 10. The only reason I don't say a 10 out of 10 is because it's very hard for a road-based scooter to perform that good off-road, and the fact that it scored a 9 out of 10 is amazing in my opinion. I'm going to say on-road, 10 out of 10, off-road, 9 out of 10, and overall 9.5 on handling. It's an amazing handling scooter with a stiffer feel and a very sport-based feeling, and I personally love that. Picking up my pace a little bit, I want to get into the features of it. Now, there's some hidden features I didn't even notice it would have, as they did not advertise it. My favorite one being traction control. It seems that if you spin the tires too much, front or rear, it will slowly cut power to the motors and readjust it until it notices the tires are no longer spinning. And this seems to work surprisingly well as a form of traction control. For example, I was going over a patch of pavement that was soaking wet with a small puddle the other day, and I decided to lock my brakes just to slide around a little bit for the fun of it, and it actually fully centered itself and corrected my slide, even when I went sideways. Now, I can't say I intended to go that far sideways, but the traction control did an amazing job of recorrecting my slide, and honestly, I don't know why they don't advertise it. If I'm going to take my best guess, it's most likely a liability thing. On to the next section of this being the lighting, where I have a few small categories to go down. First being the headlight. I've taken it out for a few rides at night, and honestly the headlight is nothing to brag about, but honestly it seems to do just fine. It's as good as the Apollo Phantom V3, and almost as nice as my Segway P100S. Overall, I'd say the headlight is perfectly sufficient and there's no need to replace it, but just make sure you level it when you're installing all the parts and tightening everything. Make sure you put it at a height that's comfortable for you for driving at night. But for me, it came just fine stock after I tightened everything. On to the next part of the lighting category, I'd like to mention the visibility that gives me a little bit of road presence. The side lights are an amazing feature and they look really nice at night, and honestly, they perform very well. I'm also going to take a moment to mention how incredibly bright the side lights are. They're pretty much impossible to miss, and I don't think I could be missed at nighttime. They're just insanely bright, and when I say insanely bright, I mean like car headlight kind of bright. It's also worth mentioning the display. It's incredibly bright even in daytime, and I've had no issue reading it even under direct sun glare. I also want to mention the turn signals really quickly. As I said previously, they're incredibly bright, and just while I'm on the topic of the features, it's one thing I did want to go over again. Even in daytime, they are visible, but they're much better at night, as with any set of turn signals. I definitely like them, and honestly, I think the fact that they incorporated them into the deck of the scooter was an amazing choice compared to ones that protrude. The next thing I want to discuss on the list of categories is going to be quality. For each individual part, such as the NUTT hydraulic brakes, which are incredible by the way I should mention, and I'll get more on those later, I also just want to say that overall every single part on the scooter doesn't seem to be cheaply made or processed, in any way that seems, lacking of quality. All the welds are flawless, and honestly I've seen nothing that alarms me, and the only thing I've actually seen is really good quality parts. The frame itself is exceptionally well made, and as I mentioned previously, all the welds seem to be flawless. So far, I really like the design choice, and honestly, I think it's perfect. As far as the repairability and just overall maintenance of the scooter, all the parts seem to be easy enough to remove individually, though I've yet to test this as I've had no need to repair or maintenance anything quite yet. Finishing off the section of quality, I do want to mention the latches real quick, as they are a key point for a lot of people. I do wish that when the bar is folded down, there was a way to latch them to the back stem as to make the bar a part of the scooter which you could carry from, as commonly seen on a lot of scooters. However, it's definitely not a deal breaker for me, and in fact, it's very far from a deal breaker. The latches on it are all sturdy, and honestly, I think it's just fine. Though it would be nice to see a way to latch the stem to the base of the scooter in the future. Coming back to something I was discussing a little bit earlier, the suspension. I'm going to break it down as between comfort and performance on-road and off-road, and as far as when you're leaning, accelerating, and decelerating. Now getting started here, as far as comfort, it's not going to be like the Apollo Phantom V3 where you have a very nice, squishy, soft, bouncy suspension. This is a much stiffer suspension. However, as far as handling on and off-road, as I said, this is something that contributes heavily to that, and I think the stiffer suspension is amazing for cornering. Overall, as I said, for leaning and just general cornering, it's pretty good, and honestly, I really like the stiffer suspension, and in fact would prefer it over softer suspension. And honestly, I think it was a great choice on Solar's part. The way the suspension handles under acceleration and deceleration is actually very minor. It doesn't seem to move much under full throttle or full braking. It doesn't seem to rock back and forth, which I really appreciate. Now hopping along onto my favorite part of the scooter, arguably, it's going to be the brakes. The NUTT hydraulic brakes are honestly one of the best brakes I've ever felt. The performance is amazing. They stop on a dime, and honestly, there's very, very little slipping or lockup, unless you really, really grab the brakes, which I find to be very nice that they came perfectly set up out of the box. The overall quality of the NUTT hydraulic brakes is amazing, and honestly I've never felt something smoother when braking, and I really, really appreciate them. And when I say I really appreciate them, I mean really appreciate them. They're the best brakes they could have put on this scooter, hands down. On to the next part being the looks. Aesthetically, it's a very pleasing scooter in my opinion, and the lights all serve their purpose and also look really nice. As far as functionality, as I said, I feel very, very, very noticeable on the road, and honestly, I don't feel like anybody could possibly miss me with the side lights. And functionally, all the lighting is perfect and pretty much comes ready to go out of the box for any night ride you could want. Getting into a more technical side of this, I want to discuss the weight. Weighing in at 65 pounds, it's one of the lighter scooters. It's definitely not terribly heavy, and I don't mind carrying it around if I have to. Honestly, it's pretty much one of the lightest 45-mile-an-hour scooters that actually has all the good features such as nice brakes and a full suspension. Now, as far as the balance and the weight distribution between the front and rear, sides, and center of the scooter, I don't know how Solar did it, but they seem to have balanced everything perfectly, as any direction I lean doesn't feel like it's weighed down or sluggish, or it feels like it's going to go out from under me. Honestly, the balance and just overall weight distribution was perfect. Now, one more thing I feel it's worth mentioning is the stability. It's pretty stable, and honestly, I don't have an issue moving, one of my hands off the bars, and honestly, it's one of the more stable scooters I've felt. Let's also take a minute to talk about the range. As far as the features you can do to get more range out of it, such as regen braking and other small things, it seems to meet the real-world range without issue. I've yet to fully drain the battery, but I've gotten pretty close, and honestly, I've gotten nearly the full 30 miles out of it. So as far as real world, I'm going to say you should expect anywhere from 20 to 27 miles, just because you've got to consider there's hills, there's weather changes, and there's other small things, such as the temperature, that can affect your range. And you never want to be stranded somewhere, so if you're ever going to expect to go on a trip, take it out yourself first, get a general feel of the area, and do your own range test to make sure you never get stranded. Now, moving away from my sheet of paper, I'd also like to discuss things I feel and I think about it, moving away from just the numbers, the graphs, and my own testing. I'd like to mention who I would buy the scooter for. If you have a teenage son who, wants to get his first scooter, he's looking for something fun and fast, don't buy him this. This isn't the scooter you stick a kid on. This isn't the scooter you stick an inexperienced person on. This isn't the scooter you stick somebody who's rode a motorcycle for a few years and thinks they can just hop on any scooter they want on. If you're going to get into a starter scooter, this isn't the scooter for that, as this scooter actually requires you to wear safety gear and have basic scooter knowledge and a little bit of, trigger discipline when it comes to your throttle. However, I want to be very clear that this doesn't mean this is a bad scooter. This is an incredible scooter if you have some riding experience. Maybe, just a year or two, a couple thousand miles on a 20 mile an hour, 30 mile an hour scooter. I think if you've had experience with a 25 to 30 mile per hour scooter, this is an incredible step up, and the 45 mile per hour difference should not be that hard to handle. So pretty much just as I was saying, if you are experienced, you should be able to handle this scooter. Just make sure you know what you're getting into, and you don't hop on something that's too fast for your skill level. With that, I feel out of all the scooters I've ridden, I also want to say it's one of my favorites for under 45 miles per hour, and also under 1500, I don't think anything really competes with it. It's an amazing scooter, and it has a very sporty feel to it, and I love the way it handles specifically. That's probably my favorite thing about it, along with the brakes. However, the acceleration is also really, really insane, and honestly, I think it's the perfect scooter if you're looking to get a 45 mile an hour scooter and you have some experience. Now, off the topic of the scooter a tiny bit, I don't want to be that person, but I'm definitely going to say this is a scooter, as I said, that you really should wear safety gear on. Now, you can skip past this maybe 10-20 seconds if you don't want to hear this, but if you're interested in what safety gear is good and what ratings matter, listen up real quick. As far as a helmet, you're going to want to look at FIM 1 or FIM 2. Those are the best standards you can buy right now. However, if you're looking for something that's sufficient and honestly still really good, you should look at ECE 22.06. 22.06 specifically. It's a European standard, and it's pretty good rating for a helmet. If you're wondering what helmet would meet that rating that I think is extremely well priced and I personally like out of all the gear I've tried, I would say the Scorpion Exo Covert FX Solid helmet is my personal favorite pick for under $250. It's an amazing helmet for the price point. Although it can be a little bit noisy, it's definitely still an amazing helmet. Now, as far as body armor, I recommend Alpine Stars. I currently use the SP8 gloves from Alpine Stars, and they are supposedly highway rated and track rated, so I think they would do just fine on a scooter. Before you come at me and say that wearing gear on a scooter is overkill, I know who's going to get up when they fall, and it's probably going to be me, and if you're not wearing gear, I'm not so certain it's going to be you. And I personally know that I would rather get up. I personally think I look pretty awesome in all the gear, and I definitely like being able to walk away from falling, because it's not usually a matter of if it's going to happen, it's usually just a matter of when. And the only thing you can really do for it is prepare or not have fun. But obviously I'm going to pick to have fun, so I'm just going to wear the gear. It takes 5 minutes to put on, and it's not terribly expensive. And if you know your ratings, you should be able to get the perfect set that's honestly pretty comfortable. And I do have to mention, it definitely pulls some women. But yeah, one more final thing before I hop back on topic. As far as the ratings for body armor you would want the rating AAA, also known as AAA. And as far as the padding rating you would want CE2 or CE level 2. Anyways, wrapping it up and hopping back on topic for our final minute, I just want to say overall I'm going to give this scooter a 9.5 out of 10. The only reason I can't give it a 10 out of 10 is because I haven't had enough time to give it a 10 out of 10. But it is seriously incredible for the price point, and honestly is one of the sturdier scooters I've ever felt. It has a very solid feel to it, and the build quality is surprisingly really, really good. The acceleration is great, and all the features on it are very nice. As far as just overall, out of all the 45 mile per hour scooters I've ridden, and that would be a lot, I would say this is one of my favorites. If you're looking to buy a scooter, I can definitely recommend the Solar EQ. It's worth mentioning that I did have a small issue with the bars, as they were moving freely of the front fork in assembly, basically the front tire. This was due to a loose bolt in the stem, and this was probably the manufacturer's fault, but at least Solar owned up to it and they made things right. They took an EQ off the shelf just to show me how to fix my issue and to show me that this was not a reoccurring issue. This is not an issue I've heard of in, other reviews and other things I've looked at, and I'm pretty sure that if you buy an EQ, you won't have the same issue. The only reason I even mentioned it is that I promised I'd give an honest review, which means saying everything. But yeah, that should wrap it up for today's review. And honestly, I can say confidently that I can definitely recommend the Solar EQ to anybody looking to get into the market of a 45-mile-an-hour scooter, and honestly, it's one of my favorite choices. And that's pretty much all I've had to say. Goodbye, everybody. Until the next one.